Welcome to today's webinar, Coverage Processing and Mapping. Coverage maps are an essential part for telecommunications companies that want to provide accurate information about their products and services. Unfortunately, many of these communication service companies are using legacy technology, which causes them to publish maps that are outdated. These inaccurate maps are costing them customers and sales revenue. Communication service providers should use different technologies such as vector tiles instead of the traditional raster tiles to generate high-quality online coverage maps. As we go through the webinar, I'd like you to think about how your organization can benefit from using this technology, which we'll explain a little later, vector tiles, to create superior coverage maps. The maps will be less costly to produce, and by using more accurate, up-to-date coverage maps, you'll actually grow your sales and revenue. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Randy France, and I'm the Telecommunications Industry Strategy Lead for Esri. Joining me in today's webinar will be Patrick Hulls, Technical Evangelist for Telecommunications. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you about the other webinars that we've given earlier this year as part of the 2017 Telecommunications of the Future webinar series. The first one we had was a foundation webinar, which was in January, and all these webinars are available online as recordings. It talked about how GIS can really be used to benefit many telecommunications processes and procedures. We then looked at serviceability in March, which covered how companies can leverage the existing services that are available and also determine what customers can get onto the network and how quickly they can connect. In May, we covered bringing the field to the engineer. Looking at rolling out new technology requires, in many cases, information from the field as far as pole access locations, where are good places to put perhaps access antennas, wireless antennas. To avoid costly field trips, we looked at how GIS technology can bring the information to the desktop of the engineer and reduce the number of those field trips. Then in August, we looked at engineering and design. What are some of the tools that help improve the process and reduce the time to plan and design network extensions and new service capabilities? Today, we're going to cover coverage processing and mapping. And then in December, we'll be covering operational intelligence. A little bit about the logistics here. If you're hearing my voice, you're connected good with audio. If you're having any problems, you can also switch to telephone mode. You can adjust your view for full screen visibility. And then if there's any questions that arise during the presentation, please type in your questions. We'll be collecting them as the presentation is ongoing, and at the end, we'll be answering them. And then don't forget to click submit to send those questions as we collect them. A little bit about the agenda today. We're going to be first covering the advantages of vector coverage maps, a little bit of the difference between them, what is a vector map versus a raster map. And then we'll be talking about the advantages. We'll be looking then at the processes for creating these types of maps. How do you go and what processes are required to create them? How can these vector maps be created more efficiently than current legacy technology? Because these maps can be created faster, less processing time, less costly, there's a lot of new business applications that can be built around them. And we'll be evaluating some of those and explaining how you can leverage some of those capabilities. And then the question that always comes up at the end is, nice technology, how do I get started? So we'll be looking at how we can get started and what steps you need to take to introduce this new kind of technology so that your organization take advantage of it. Before we get started, what I'd like to do is I'd like to first look at some poll questions. Let's get a little bit of an idea of the audience we have here. So we're going to bring you into the situation here, and we're going to ask you a couple questions here. how many different coverage maps does your organization create? Now, perhaps you are not in that organization, so maybe you don't create coverage maps. Or maybe you create 1 to 2 coverage maps, 3 to 5, more than 5, or you don't know. So submit your answers, and we'll look at that. We'll give a few seconds here for people to respond. Wow, that's quite a bit higher than I thought. It looks like almost 70% of you are creating more than 5 different coverage maps. That's a really impressive number, and we'll explain how this new technology is going to help you to create even more if necessary to be able to share those within the organization. Let's go to our next poll question. Seems to be a lot of coverage maps being created. So how often do you update your coverage maps? Once again, opt in there for don't create the coverage maps, or weekly, monthly, yearly, or perhaps you don't know. So make your selection and hit submit. What we find is sometimes because of the cost and the time required to process these maps, people aren't creating them and updating them as often as they'd like. And there's the results. It looks like it's a little bit more evenly dispersed, but over 50% of the audience there is creating coverage maps monthly or yearly. So what that means is if you're creating a monthly, you're perhaps only a month behind. If you're launching new 5G services or even fiber-based services or any type of new service, you're getting that out fairly quickly. So customers or even your sales and marketing people would know within a month any kind of new services that are available. But some of you are almost a quarter, aren't producing these coverage maps more frequently than year. You might not be realizing revenue on it for up to a year after you made that capital investment and activated the service. That's quite interesting. So what we're going to show you is how you can improve the availability, more often update those maps, and actually reduce the cost of creating those maps. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Patrick Hulse, and he's going to be talking to you about how you can really use this new technology. Patrick?
Thank you, Randy. So there are advantages to vector coverage maps that will allow you to produce more coverage maps and update them frequently. But first off, what is the difference between raster data and vector data? Well, raster data consists of small grids with each cell value representing a certain attribute. So that could be either the quality of service or the DBM value of a particular sector. So the difference between that and vector data, well, vector data consists of points, lines, or polygon features with vertices that make up a larger area or make up the shape of that particular coverage area. And so there are some advantages to using vector data over raster data. The first is associated metadata. So with the vector data, you can have many attributes associated with a coverage area. So the entire area could be representing either the quality of service, a particular type of service, or even the status of that coverage area and whether or not that particular area is online or offline, pulling information from the sector or site. Another advantage is that with the vector data and vector coverage maps, you can create very complex business applications and run spatial analysis on top of it and be able to quickly analyze coverage information, compare it to coverage maps that might be coming from verified coverage or drive tests, and run different types of analysis, if then scenarios, to see what would happen if you increase value of increased propagation of a particular sector. And we'll see some of those business apps a little later on. And then finally, you can now create vector tile caches from vector features that can allow you to have very high performant web-based maps. So what is the difference between the traditional raster caching and the new vector tile caching. So with raster caching, it usually took days or weeks to generate the tile caches. So that was taking your raster data and publishing it up to the server so you could create a web service that can be consumed in a web map, and caching an entire US based or large scale area of your coverage data. The time that it takes to actually process that and publish it up is a long time. Also, the amount of servers or cores needed to be able to do that processing and publish it up is quite a bit. It's also expensive because you need a lot of servers and you need a lot of data storage to house that data. The amount that it costs to be able to create those maps can get very expensive. And the amount of storage required to cache that data is quite a bit. And that is because the raster data, when you cache a raster, it is actually taking a snapshot or an image of a particular tile and caching it for that zoom extent. So for the entire extent of the coverage area and for every zoom level that a user on a web application would be zooming in and out, you're actually creating a picture of that coverage at that zoom extent. So to be able to store all of those little tile pictures takes a lot of storage. It's also a fixed resolution, which we'll see some of the differences between dynamic resolution and fixed resolution when we get into the vector tile caches. And finally, because of the amount of storage, how long it takes, this really reduces you to monthly updates and sometimes yearly updates, just to reduce the amount of time and cost. But you can see a ton of benefits from converting from raster to vector data and then caching those vector tiles. So the reason for the value that we see here is because a vector feature isn't as complex as a raster PNG. And with vector tiles, you're actually storing the entire feature instead of just taking a snapshot or an image of a particular coverage area. So the amount of time that it takes to generate and publish up and cache a large scale vector tile coverage map is just hours versus days or weeks. You can do it from a single desktop computer instead of a whole server cluster to be able to process that and publish it up. You also see a decrease in processing resources. So everything from the amount of servers required, the amount of data that it takes, to the amount of storage that is required to store it, all of that reduces. And you go from terabytes of storage down to megabytes, and we'll see that in an example here. You also have dynamic resolution. So if a user is pulling up your coverage map on a mobile device, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with the capabilities of consumer grade mapping, where you can rotate the map around and you can see all of your labels dynamically switch and rotate with your map instead of being a static image. You can have all of those capabilities with vector tiles for very clean, fancy looking coverage maps. And you can start publishing up and creating your maps on a more frequent basis with weekly or even daily updates to let your customers know when you have a new sector up and running or when you have a new service in a particular area. So now we'd like to do our third and final audience poll of the day. So this question will be, how long is the process to create your coverage maps? So this includes the processing of the data and the caching of the map tiles. So how long for your engineers to produce the RF propagation and then take that data and convert it into the coverage maps that you create today for your customers? All right, and we'll go ahead and close that poll question and share it here with everybody. So as we can see from the results, about 37% of you said up to a week to create and process your coverage maps. With the vector tiles, you can reduce the amount of time that takes you down to either hours, a day, or even minutes. And so one additional value to the vector tile coverage maps is in the styling of the coverage maps. So with vector tiles, you can actually filter the coverage area or change the color scheme or styling directly on the client side by modifying some JSON. So if you were creating coverage maps for your MVNOs, instead of republishing up an entirely new coverage map, you can just modify some pieces of code on the client side of your application and have a brand new looking coverage map that's either filtered or the entire color scheme is changed. So this will also help reduce the amount of time to create these new maps. All right, so how do you go about using the coverage mapping and processing solutions that Esri provides to create your vector data and then generate your vector tile coverage maps? Well, first, we consume the RF propagation data. So today, Esri consumes the majority of output data that comes from a variety of engineering tools out there. So we can ingest that raw RF propagation data. Then using our coverage processing solution template, we can process that data, create coverage feature classes, generate the vector tiles, which will allow you to then share that information, publish it up to the server, which creates a vector tile package. Then that service then can be deployed into a web map, which then that web map, you can modify the color scheme, you can modify the filtering on it to create different types of coverage maps. And once you have that map styled accordingly, then using a variety of out-of-the-box Esri applications that you can configure different business solutions. So let's actually take a look at a demonstration of this coverage processing in action. So here we have a coverage map that is our raw RF propagation data that has come from our engineering and design tool. Here I'm using our desktop application, ArcGIS Pro. Now I've brought this raw propagation data into this application, and what I want to do now is create a vector data set of this data and then publish it up as a vector tile service to be consumed in web applications. So with this data and using our coverage processing solution template, we can ingest that raw signal strength raster, and we can configure the coverage processing values for the different cell signal values. So based on how you want to process this and the type of information that you want to show, whether it's signal quality or the type of service, you can configure this model very easily and run it, which then produces a final coverage map of vector features. So in this example here, we can see the way that we've configured the model is to produce a coverage map that shows quality of service. So if we zoom in here, we can see that these are vector features. So each of these features are a large polygon area instead of a single grid that was coming from the raw raster data. Now, once we have created our coverage map, we then want to publish this up as a web layer or a service to our ArcGIS portal, our mapping portal, so that we can configure these web applications. So directly from this Pro application, we can publish this up to our server. We can rename this SFT wireless coverage. And then you'll notice that we have the different value types, the different service types that we can create, including our new vector tile type. We can also create a summary tag so that we can easily find this service once we publish it up into our organization. If we go over to the configuration tab, we can see different types of settings for our vector tile. So the zoom level that we want to be able to create this cache for, as well as the different tiling schemes that we can be able to generate here based off of your web application. And then once we have configured this, we can then publish this up to our ArcGIS portal account. Now, to save some time, I've already gone ahead and done that. And I can let you know that to publish just the coverage map here for the state of Florida took around 4 or 5 minutes to publish that up and cache that base map or cache that coverage map. So here I am in our ArcGIS web mapping portal. So this is the account where I can log into to find all of the data that our organization has shared, including our network information, whether that be OSP facility data or our coverage mapping data. Now, once I've published up that coverage map, I want to create a web map that I can consume in a configurable application. So bringing up this web map, we can search through our organization to be able to find the layer that we just published up. So if I search for SFT wireless coverage, I get back all of the results for the data that has been published into our portal, including our vector tile coverage map. Now, if we go take a look at this service and the information associated with it, we'll notice here that this particular coverage area is only 11 megabytes of data. So the amount of storage on our server is far less than a traditional raster cache. Now, once we've created our web map here, and we can save this as a new web map, what we'll want to do is take this web map and consume it into a business application. So we'll share this web map and then click on our Create a Web App tab and either use one of the configurable web apps that Esri provides or use our web app builder that will allow us to kind of customize an application with little coding. So let's go ahead and get started creating our web app. So using this builder, we can add in a variety of different tools or capabilities into this application. We can also change different styling on this particular app, including changing the name. We'll just call it our coverage map app. And then as soon as we save this here, we can see that the name of the application has changed. So there's a variety of widgets or tools and capabilities that are part of this builder that we can easily add in to either give our customers information like a legend or layer information to be able to toggle on and off, or configure pop-ups to let users type in their address and see the quality of service at a particular location. And then using this application, since it is web-based in HTML5 and JavaScript, it's completely configurable, as well as dynamic to the screen resolution of whatever type of device a customer might be pulling your coverage maps on. So if they want to see the coverage on a mobile device, the application will be entirely responsive to that screen resolution. All right, so that was a quick example of one application that could be configured using the ArcGIS platform. We also walked through the coverage processing and mapping of that coverage map to be able to consume it within that web application. Now, there's a variety of business apps that you can configure with the coverage data that you are producing. One of those is that coverage locator. So you can have very dynamic, fast, good-looking coverage maps right on the front of your website. You can also create verified coverage maps. So this will, a lot of service providers today are trying to show their customers that this isn't just planned or raw data coming from an engineering tool, that we've actually done a drive test or collected CDR data from customers and verified the quality of service in a particular location. So with the ArcGIS platform, we've got real-time tools and big data analytics that will allow you to ingest that information, process it, summarize it into these hexagon bins or any type of bins, and then provide that as a layer that sits on top of your coverage maps to let your customers know whether or not it's been a verified coverage for that particular area. You can also create network operation applications. So either dashboards or customer care facing apps that will show them either offline or online coverage areas. Since you are creating since you can create these vector coverage areas for each and every cell site, and it takes far less time and less data, you can have an attribute associated with that that says online or offline. And so as real-time information is coming in, you can append it and change those attributes, and so you can have a live coverage map showing what the propagation is in real time. And then finally, serviceability apps. So giving your sales and marketing teams a tool to know the most up-to-date service and the types of services in a particular location. So let's do one additional demonstration here of one of these business applications. All right, so here we have our wireless bulk serviceability application. Now, what this application allows our sales team to do is take a spreadsheet of locations or businesses or customer points, drag it into this app, and quickly do a serviceability check on the quality of service and types of service available at a given location. So we'll select a CSV here of our potential customer locations. Now, what this spreadsheet contains is just an address field, the business name, and some additional information that the customer has provided us. And then what this application does is it takes those addresses and it quickly geocodes them, which we can see here on the map that it's already gone and geocoded. I think it's about 100 different Home Depot or business points and plotted them on the map. And then it's running some processing to compare and analyze each of those locations to the coverage data underneath. So each of the points coming back here that are turning green are verified in a coverage area and designated as we can provide them with service. So once it's done that, we then get a table here that has the original attribute information from the Excel, but then it also appended additional information from the processing, like whether or not this particular location has coverage and what is the quality of service at that particular location. Then we can export this back out to CSV, send it on to the customer, or provide them with that serviceability check. So that was one example of an additional business application that can be configured using the out-of-the-box configurable apps that ArcGIS provides. So how would you go about creating some of those additional business apps or even that serviceability application that we just saw? Well, earlier we walked through taking that raw RF propagation data and then bringing it into ArcGIS Pro and using our coverage processing and mapping tool, we were able to process that data. Then we published it up as a vector tile service to our ArcGIS Enterprise. Now, our ArcGIS Enterprise has a GIS server which hosts that service and publishes it into our mapping portal, which we saw that I logged into to be able to access that service and create that web map. Now, once that web map is created, that web map can be consumed into any of the configurable applications that we talked about or showed. And that same web map can be used multiple times within multiple applications, or you can style those web maps differently, but again, have only one service that feeds all of those applications. This is great because it reduces the amount of storage on your servers for hosting that service, but also if that service is then tied to live information, as soon as that map changes, all of your applications that are tied to that service update as well. So you can create your coverage locators and verified coverage maps for your customers outside your firewall, and then have your business apps protected sitting internally behind your firewall. And then finally, if you want to create those verified coverage maps, we can consume your CDR data from a variety of different sources or in real time through our real-time engine GeoEvent, and then process that data within GeoAnalytics to then have that as a new service or layer that can be brought into that same map, so that you can have that verified coverage layer on top of your coverage map. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Randy France to talk about the business value of the Esri coverage mapping and processing solutions.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, there's a lot of good reasons that you want to convert your coverage maps to vector tiles. And one of the biggest ones is really providing an enhanced customer experience, especially if you're rendering the maps on a web. And most customers now are looking for that information online. And you can render the maps a lot faster when you have vector tiles versus raster. So it's a whole improved customer experience there. And not only is it better for the maps as rendering, the accuracy is going to be improved because you can create the maps more frequently. So as Patrick said, you don't have these outdated maps or maps that haven't been verified. So it's a much, much better customer experience. And this is naturally going to flow through to increased sales, increased revenue capabilities. Just as he showed with that bulk serviceability test. A customer calls up and he's got 100, in that case with 143 sites. And within a minute or two, you can tell him which sites are going to be serviceable and which sites are not going to be serviceable. So you might not be able to service everything, but you can immediately tell him the bulk of the locations that will be serviceable. The other thing too is reduced costs. I mean, just think about it. There's reduced storage costs, there's reduced processing time, there's a tremendous amount of cost reduction here. And with that cost reduction, you can actually start creating more maps, more specialized maps for different parts of the organization. So those are some of the new applications that you can do. So when somebody's coming to you and you're updating your maps now, perhaps monthly or even yearly, and they want 2 or 3 more maps, previously that would have required a lot more processing time, a lot more cost. But now, when you can produce these things within hours or minutes, you can create more maps, more support for the organization. So these are many reasons why you really want to improve your coverage or change your coverage maps out to this new capability here. As I said earlier, how do you get started? Well, you need a foundation, and that foundation is essentially ArcGIS. So you want your WebGIS foundation, and you want to build it on the ArcGIS platform. You can also go in, we've got a template. So if you go to solutions.arcgis.com, we've got a processing solution template for you. So it can jumpstart, get you started. The nice thing is you can customize it, you can configure it, but we've done the basics for you so you can get up and running pretty quick. The other thing you want to do is you publish your coverage maps and leverage all of your ArcGIS to increase the business value. So you can publish your maps and then distribute them throughout the organization. And if you have any more questions or need any more assistance, feel free to give us a call. Either talk to your service rep, or you can just email us directly at telecominfo@esri.com. So if you need any additional help, talk to your representative or just give us a call. What I'd like to do now is we'll go through and answer some of the questions that have been coming in. If you haven't had a chance to submit a question, please do so now. Here's one, Patrick. Can we run specific queries in vector tiles? Patrick?
Sorry, I apologize, I was on mute. Yes, so create queries or run queries on vector tiles. In order to do that, you can modify the JSON associated with that web service. This will allow you to filter or change and query the data underneath. To do complex filtering and queries, you'll need to run that on a traditional feature service. The great thing about the ArcGIS platform is that you can run a vector tile cache service side by side with a feature service. So you can use the cached service for the high performance, very good looking, crisp map, while using that feature service to run the more complex analytics on top of it.
Good. We're getting a number of questions in here. I think this one kind of sums it up. Our engineering group already creates the coverage maps using other tools. How would we move to vector maps and vector tiles from what we're doing today?
Yep, good question. So we can consume a variety of different raw propagation data, different raster types and other types of data that are produced, consume it into ArcGIS. From there, you can run some of the processing tools that we showed to create vector features, which will then allow you to generate your vector tile caches in your server.
Okay. So what input file format do you need for ArcGIS Pro? And some of the specifics they mentioned there are from Atoll or from Planet.
Yep, so I know that we consume the Atoll and Planet Mentum propagation outputs. There's a listing in our coverage processing solution that has the entire list of different data types. So if you go to solutions.arcgis.com and then you go under telecommunications, you'll see the coverage processing and mapping solution template. And in there is a set of data requirements, and that will contain a list of the different types of data that we can consume into ArcGIS.
So this tool does not create a propagation map.
That is correct. Yep, we do have a business partner, a couple business partners that have engineering and design tools that sit on top of ArcGIS to allow you to create the propagation directly within ArcGIS, or we can just consume the data from an existing engineering or design tool. But this is, this set of tools is specifically to generate the coverage maps from that propagation data for web-based applications.
Can you share the RF formats that are accepted by ArcGIS?
Yep. So again, if you go to our solution site, that will have the list of acceptable RF formats.
And we're getting a number of questions here about will the presentation be available online in video recording? And yes, it will. It should be out either later this week or early next week, and we'll send out an email to everyone giving them the link so they can access it online. Here's one. How do you integrate network and market data onto our maps?
Yeah, so there are a variety of different ways to do that. A lot of organizations today have sales and marketing data that we can consume, whether that be actual lat longs of locations of businesses or customers, or addresses of those locations that we can bring in and then run analysis on top of it of what businesses are within a particular coverage area. Esri also offers a lot of demographic data, a part of the ArcGIS platform. So we've got a lot of organizations today that will just use and leverage all that data that Esri provides out of the box and run analysis to see, if they were to put up a new site here and the propagation was set this way, how many potential customers would be in that particular location. Or for that kind of outage map example, if you want to be able to see even real-time data, how many customers were located in that area or previously connected to that site before it went off, you can do some spatial analysis to understand what customers are affected.
Can the maps be shown on mobile devices?
Yes, they can. You can either consume the web maps that we were creating in a configurable web-based app that can be pulled up in a browser on a smart device, or just as we showed how we had that web app builder, we also have a app builder for native mobile devices. So you can create a native mobile application that consumes your coverage maps, or using some of our APIs and SDKs, you can embed our web maps into an existing app that you may be providing to your customers.
Good. Here's another question that came in about recording of the other webinar sessions that we had. Specifically, do we have links to the other recordings? And what we'll do is when we send out the link for this recording, this webinar, we will send out the links for the previous recorded webinars as well. So everybody will have all the recordings, the videos to be able to look up and reference. Okay. We have another one here about styling. Can the styling be edited client side?
Yes, it can. So using the JSON from the web service, you can modify that directly within the web application. And I'll actually be writing a blog after this on how to do that and sharing some additional videos that show exactly how that can be done. So be sure to follow our GeoNet site for that.
Here's a question about pole and tower databases. Do you have pole or tower databases of the US? I can jump in on that one. We do not have, nor am I aware of anybody that has created a pole database for the United States. There are companies that have created tower databases, and the FCC actually has a tower database that's available freely online. You can go to the FCC website and download that. There are other companies, specifically tower providers, that have created tower databases. In many cases, the companies not only provide their own towers, but also provide towers of their competitors as well. So those are available. And if you need anything specific on that, if you can't find anything, just email me at the end, and I will be able to help you more specifically and give you a reference site on that. Here's a question. If I want more information on how to set this up for my organization, where should I go?
It's another good question. So let's actually bring up our social outlets. So you can follow the Esri team either on LinkedIn, GeoNet, or Twitter. If you're looking for more information on how to either get the coverage processing solution template up and running, or if you're looking to access that blog post I mentioned about configuring the JSON and the styling client side, please refer to our GeoNet site. We do have a new telecommunications community site with a lot of users on there participating, asking questions, and promoting different tools and tips and tricks for ways that they have used the ArcGIS platform for telecommunications. So it's a great resource to either engage with other service providers in the GIS space and to get a little bit more information on the technical side of what we have just shown here on the webinar.
Here's another one. Can you perform the coverage processing on the server to automate the task?
Yes. Yep. So the model that I showed with the coverage processing tool, that model can be pushed up server side via a analysis service. So all of our spatial analysis tools can be brought into that model builder experience and create a more complex model that can be then pushed server side as a service. So if you want to automate the process, whereas new propagation data is coming in and you're pushing that server side, you can do all of the processing to help automate the creation of the coverage maps.
Could you go into more detail how you would create a verified coverage map?
Yep, definitely. So the verified coverage map, the output is just a additional layer that would sit on top of your coverage maps. So traditionally, we've seen customers ingest either CDR data or drive test data into the ArcGIS platform using our real-time engine, in which we then take that data, store it into a big data GIS database, and then do some analysis on it. That analysis could be just simple spatial aggregation, where you're then aggregating that data to a particular area. In that screenshot we showed, it was just a hexagon bin in which we aggregated the quality of service information into that to say, yep, the quality of service that we have predicted from our RF tool is the actual quality of service in that location. So once you've run that analysis, it's just now a shared service, just like your coverage map service, and you can bring both into a web map and share that out as a verified coverage application.
Okay, great. Here's another question about the poll database. Do you have plans to digitize poll data of the entire US? We often get questions about poll data, and we would love to be able to do that. Unfortunately, those polls are owned by literally thousands of companies, utility companies, telephone companies around the country. And so there is no single source at this time or any way to aggregate that. So the answer to that is probably not until somebody decides that they want to go out there and actually collect all that poll data.
Yep, and I'll add a comment to that. Two things that we've seen our customers do is either working with our partners and some of our Street View partners, being able to take the Street View and using machine learning, create a database of polls from that Street View data. So that will start to create a database poll kind of automatically using Street View data that's being collected from some of our partners. The other is using one of our configurable mobile apps to kind of do a crowdsource with field crews to be able to start creating a database of those poles. So as crews are going out to either do work on the network, provision new customers, they've got a a mobile or web application that's a simple survey in which they see poles. They go out, they just collect a couple pieces of information and the location of that pole, and now you're using your field crews to help crowdsource locations of poles that can be accessed by the engineering team.
Here's an interesting question regarding, as you were talking there about crowdsourcing, one that came in. Can you use phones and apps on phones to do verification of coverage?
Yes. Yep. So we don't provide a kind of a drive test application, but a lot of the organizations that we work with, they'll provide an app to their customers, for them to go in, check their services, pay their bills, and that application will actually do a drive test, essentially a ping of the service or the wireless signal to be able to record that information of the quality of service, type of service, all of that information that's then pushed back to the organization. So, we do not have an API or an SDK to be able to create that. But if you build an application to ingest it, collect it, we can definitely analyze it, process it, and we've got very large service providers today that are doing that processing, crunching, spatial analysis of the CDR data.
Here's one about bulk serviceability. Where can I learn more about how to build a bulk serviceability application?
Good question. That is actually another solution template up on our solution site. You can also refer to our GeoNet space here, and I'll be sure to provide some information, a link to that with some instructions on how to set it up in that community space.
Okay, great. We're starting to come up against the top of the hour here, so we want to thank everyone for the questions they've submitted. If we haven't had gotten a chance to get back to you, we will reach out to you individually. And don't forget about our next webinar that's coming up, Operational Intelligence, and that'll be in December. And we'll be sending out emails about that. So be sure to tune in for that one. And we will send out the links for the videos, both for this one as well as the previous one, so everybody can be sure to join us in the future. Thanks everyone for your time, and have a great day.